Jeff. So let's go ahead and get started if Melissa is able to
Very
send us
good.
live. I'll wait for your cue, Melissa.
Guys, there's definitely a gremlin today. You are good to go.
We're good to go now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, good
Thank you.
evening, everyone. This is Katie Crystal, the chair of the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission. Welcome to the January 7th, 2021 meeting of the Executive Committee. We are beginning at 5:43 p.m. Given the ongoing public health emergency, we are quite obviously conducting this meeting electronically. Just want to notify all that thank you to our staff. We have followed the procedures and guidelines and the legislation that authorizes us to meet virtually. And this meeting is simultaneously being broadcast to the public on YouTube. It does sound like folks are having some technical difficulties, so as a reminder, you're welcome to use the chat for technical difficulties if there's anything that somebody on staff can help you out with. For that, we may not use it for conducting business, but we certainly can use it for fixing the gremlins. So, okay, quite a few things on our executive committee agenda this evening, and so I hope everybody's had a chance to review it. I'm just going to, I'm sorry, don't have my document in front of me. I had the wrong one. Anyway, okay, great. So we'll do just a quick roll call. If you could respond here or present when you hear your name, that would be terrific. So Kate, over to you for roll call.
Fantastic. So Chair Crystal.
Here.
Mr. Aguirre.
Here.
Ms. Filler-Korn. Mr. Letourneau.
Here.
Mr. McKay.
Here.
Mr. Meyer. Mr. Smedberg.
Present.
Mr. Snyder.
Here.
Oh, great. Fantastic. And also Ms. Palchik.
Yes, here. My video is broken, but I'm here in audio.
Thank you for joining. And also we have present, I was Executive Director Kate Mattice, our Director of Finance and Administration, Scott Colcorth, our Legislative Liaison, Amy Perrin-Seibert, Legal Counsel, Steve McIsaac, and our Web and IT Manager, Melissa Walker.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ms. Mattice. Okay, we do have a summary of our December 3rd Executive Committee meeting before us. We don't take a formal action here, but if anybody has corrections, here would be a time to raise them. All right, I'm assuming no. And then Kate, would you want to speak to the agenda, just to review what's ahead for the full commission meeting tonight?
Absolutely happy to do so. So indeed, we do have our routine consent agenda item regarding being an electronic meeting. And then we really dive into our new governance and leadership. We actually have 4 actions related to new officers, board appointments, Treasury Commission appointments, and then our signatory and pension trustees. Then we do have our briefing by our WMATA board members, followed by a resolution to accept our strategic plan on our transit technology program, specifically our regional fare collection strategic plan. And finally, we do have the VRE adoption of their revised 21 and FY22 budgets for this year. One thing I do want to highlight, we do have a guest speaker coming, her name is Beth Osborne. She's with Transportation for America, and she's going to give us an insight into, especially in the federal and national space with transportation. I've actually had the pleasure of working with Beth over the years, and so just as a reminder, I knew I'd heard a lot of good feedback about having outside speakers, so I'm really hoping that Beth perhaps is quite timely with the change in leadership in the Senate to be talking about federal transportation issues.
Excellent. Thank you, Kate. And then did you want to speak to the good news from our three of our legislative members?
Indeed, sort of off the press. And so again, this is following up on actions from our December meeting. The commission asked us to explore opportunities in the General Assembly this year to identify some one-time relief funding for our localities. And we just actually submitted to Delegate Krizik, and he will be submitting a budget amendment for one-time funding to support all of our local jurisdictions in their ability to pay their WMATA subsidies in FY22. We've also received verbal confirmation that our 2 senators on NVTC are going to do the same thing on the Senate side next week.
This is just terrific news, and I think a real credit to Kate and Amy, and I think our legislative staffs from the jurisdictions for following right up on what sounded like a willingness on the part of our General Assembly members to entertain such requests at our last meeting. I think you all remember that we swiftly as a commission directed our staff to please do that. And so, to just see Delegate Krizik and Senators Bell and Eben be willing to pursue that so quickly is really heartening. I think we've all been thrilled at the good news for the federal implications for WMATA, but the lack of state and local relief has certainly meant that we are going to be challenged by needing to pay even modest increases in our own WMATA bills. And so I think this would be a great opportunity for the General Assembly to bring some commitment to continue to shore up WMATA in a way that doesn't place it into direct competition with other local priorities like schools and public infrastructure and public health at a time when our revenues are so endangered. So I'm really grateful to our General Assembly members for entertaining that, and to Kate and Amy for pulling it together so quickly. One thing on our agenda today that Kate did reference is the discussion of the 2021 officers and committees. I feel like we've now talked about this about 3 times, so I don't know that we need too much more discussion. We have not heard from any members of the commission with any concerns about it. I've been grateful to receive a few very supportive comments, and so if all goes well in that vote tonight, we are especially looking forward to having Dahlia Palchik join us on the executive committee as secretary treasurer. So Dahlia, thanks for being here tonight, and we'll look forward to having you as an officer in future executive committee meetings, should all go well. And a big thank you to Kanik and Dave and David for re-upping in addition. Okay, great. I wanted to give Scott Qualcorf, who's with us, our CFO, and Kate a little bit of room to start on a presentation about our fiscal 22 budget. You all probably remember from a couple of months ago, generally we'd be, I think, voting on the budget now. I think it was all abundantly clear to all of us that we have a lot of question marks about where our budget is going, and that we were able to still move forward on the budget process and still get the information needed to our jurisdictions in time for deliberations on our own budget, and so that we should certainly do that and advise, and I believe actually voted accordingly. Long story short, the full commission won't see the budget until the February meeting. But I know that Kate and Scott feel like there are some big decisions ahead, and really would appreciate the feedback of this group as they pull that together. So Kate, I'll turn it over to you, and Scott, thank you for joining us for a brief presentation.
Well, thank you very much. Indeed, this is really getting feedback from all of you so that we can present, a meaningful and a directed budget to the commission for discussion next month. It will actually also be open to public comment, and then for adoption by and acceptance by the full commission in March. So this is that first step. And so just as a reminder, we've got a couple of different moving parts, one of which is the things that that affect the actual costs that we're incurring within our budget. About 68% of our overall budget when it comes to costs are really our salary and benefits. I mean, we are a people-driven organization. We have been really delighted to have some incredible talent on our staff. So that really represents about 68% of our budget. Obviously, we do have workspace. We do have people going back to that workspace, but we do have about 10% of our budget does go towards rent. And then the other big chunk that's out there is our contracted service, which includes things like Steve McIsaac and Amy, as well as our auditors to help with our financial statement audits and our commuter choice technical support. And so those are really the big drivers that we have going on. On the other side, when it comes to the revenue sources, there's a number of different sources that are at play. Some are very much fixed, and some that have a chance to be a little bit more variable. The first one, which is fixed, and it's actually been fixed for more than a decade, is the dollar amount that's actually coming from localities' own budgets. That represents about 8%. This commission actually took action back in October to send those local jurisdiction bills out. And it's roughly about just under $250,000 total that we ask from the jurisdictions from their own funding. The other big source of funding, obviously, our toll revenues from 66 and 395. Those must be used specifically for work that supports those programs. But the lion's share of our revenues really come from state aid, and it's state aid that we are managing on behalf of the jurisdictions. And so specifically, we're looking to the tune of somewhere between $200 and $250 million a year that we're typically managing on behalf of the jurisdictions. A portion of that supports the GNA of NVTC. And then finally, something that we've been able to do for a number of years is look at previously unallocated, effectively carryover balances and applying them. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what that means for this month. Scott, did you want to add anything more just to talk a little bit about these cost drivers and the revenue drivers?
No, I think you have them covered very well. I mean, most of our budget, it is captured in basically three main categories, as Kate said, the salaries being the primary one. Yeah. But I have nothing really to add. Thank you.
Great. And definitely correct me if I misstate anything.
Will do.
So when it comes to this coming year, really, again, from the staff level, our proposal is really focusing on the priorities about making sure that we're meeting the fixed costs, paying our rent, and all that good stuff. Obviously, our ability with our staff and our other resources to be able to support the commission priorities, requirements we have from the General Assembly, federal requirements, audit requirements. Obviously, those are right at the top of the things that we need to do. We've also been really effective in the last number of years of doing regional technical and coordination efforts. I mean, later today, we're going to be asking to approve the regional strategic plan for fare collection. Again, we're coordinating, and we've been asked to coordinate a lot of those regional activities. And again, and I think both Matt and Paul can talk to this. I think our level of responsibility and our needs to keep our jurisdictions at the table and informed when it comes to WMATA activities has been elevated over the last couple of years, and this budget reflects the continued high level of effort associated with those things. The thing that I'm hoping as we look forward into the new year, and I guess maybe apparent with getting the letter out to the General Assembly, is our ability to pivot so we can take advantage, whether it be state money, federal money, getting grant applications in. How can we leverage those things? Our ability to be able to do that, we consider a part of this budget with the work we do. One thing that we do have, we held back in hiring a financial management position that was originally approved for this year. And part of it is we were very concerned. But what it is really we do continue to have that need for an additional financial management person to support Scott. We've got a lot of things going on in the commuter choice space, but also complexities within the federal and state money. So the budget request that we have does include filling that position. And we can talk about a couple different options with that. And then finally, we have been able to bring on human resources support in the past year, sharing Becky Mariner with VRE and PRTC. And I have to tell you, it has been very good to have that. So those are the things that really make up when it comes to the staff recommendation for a budget. And I do believe with the staff recommendation, we would be able to fulfill all of these expectations. So again, it is kind of complicated. I'm going to talk a little bit about the things that we can cut on the cost side, and then I want to talk about the things we can do on the revenue side. And so what we've got here is I wanted to share, there are basically just about 1.15 million in costs that regardless of what we do, unless we start doing some things like, subleasing and other things that are going on, those are really our fixed costs that are going on. So the variable costs that we have the ability to play around with are really about staffing, training development, and our human resources support. And again, with staffing making up 68% of our budget, this is a place where we have some maneuverability, but that said, we have a really talented group of staff. So staff retention, and making sure that they've got the tools and the training they need to be good on their job is something I a very passionate interest in making sure we can do. And so what we would like in our sort of optimal space would be is still very close to being a flat budget from last year, which would be a budget that would look at just over just about a 1.9% increase over last year's G&A budget. If, again, with your guidance, you wanted us to look at some other options, we have presented for you some different options if we held back on some of the compensation, and also then if we held back on hiring that financial person. And so I actually want to go to the costs, the revenue side next, but I do want to get some input on both of these, if that works for folks. As we mentioned, the lion's share of our revenue comes from state aid. And we've been given guidance from DRBT, while it is not official, that it's probably reasonable for us to look to last year's revenue sources to be comparable. So again, comparing to last year is what we look at. The challenge, and I believe I mentioned this when we talked about the budget back in October, is in typical years, the time at NVTC, especially the first number of years, we had a lot of staff turnover. What it meant is that we had a gap in salaries and benefits that gave us the ability to do some carryover into future years. I think a very good thing is we have actually retained all of our same staff for over a year and a half. So what we don't have is that large carryover balance. If we were to just use the carryover balance that we do have available to us, that's the first line here. But Scott and I kind of rolled up our sleeves and understood that we may see ourselves with carryover actually from this current fiscal year, and especially because we're doing the budget already halfway through the year, we have a sense that we can probably have, $75,000 in carryover from this fiscal year that could be applied to next. It's a little bit of a risk because normally we carry it over into the future year, but this would allow us to sort of reduce the impact on the additional state aid that we'd be looking at. Just to talk a little bit through what the numbers that are on here, the percentages that you see is the percentage of the total state aid that this is being taken from. And when it comes to, so for example, roughly $250 million. And so our overhead on the DRPT funding that our jurisdictions get is consistently less than 2%. In fact, it's much closer to 1.2, between 1.08 and 1.2%. And so this is pretty much what I wanted to present to you. So I think at this point, I would like to pause and hear feedback on, and I'm happy to switch back and forth on the slides, hear feedback on the budget cost side and feedback on the revenue side, because obviously they need to work together.
Great, thank you, Kate. I think we're a small enough group that we can just throw open the floor here.
Maybe pointedly, do you support the staff recommendation for us to move forward? And if not, how can we modify that to be something that the executive committee would support?
Yeah.
I can start, I guess, if you want. I have no problem with the budget option A on the cost side. I don't know what everybody else is doing in their jurisdictions, but I'm pretty confident that Loudon will be at a 3% roughly pay increase for 22, and we were able to fund 3% for 21, and even did retroactive back to when we had frozen it. So this is consistent to that. And then on the revenue side, I guess I'm not quite understanding. So the question is whether we use more of a projected 21 surplus. What exactly does that get us other than money? But I mean, what's the advantage of reducing the amount of state aid?
Well, the advantage would be to all of the jurisdictions as to, this is state aid that's coming from DRPT that NVTC is managing. So we're trying to minimize how much of that NVTC would be taking. And so.
Okay.
Yeah,
how solid is the 21 projection?
Scott, do you want to talk to that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm fairly confident in the 75. I was a little conservative with it, based it on, activity through November, and, our activity level or spending level is pretty steady. So I'm fairly confident.
Is there a disadvantage to applying it now?
Well, not really. I mean,
Okay.
the only disadvantage would be is if it doesn't materialize. But as I said, I'm fairly confident it would. You know, obviously, I think the more surplus that we have, the more wiggle room we have in case we run into some issues, it would be good. But besides that, that's really it.
I think probably the most important is that this 75, and this again, why we looked at different scenarios. This 75,000 would still leave us some surplus, and that's why we wanted to present it. We didn't want to present something that would put us in a financially difficult situation.
Sounds fine to me, but see what others think.
Thank you. And actually, just to follow up on what Matt was just saying, could you just repeat again? This assumes what in terms of increases for staff? The option A.
So it would include a 1.5% cost of living and available a pot that would be approximately 1.5% for COLA and 1.5 that would be available as a pot for merit increases, obviously based upon the performance of an individual employees.
Okay, great.
And
Like
of
that, I am
course it would-
supportive. I wish our budget was quite as rosy as Loudon's, but I think in general this wouldn't be out of step, and so it seems certainly appropriate. The growth, even with this optimal scenario, in the overall budget year over year is relatively modest. So I'm supportive of it as well, Kate.
Okay, thank you.
Dave Snyder, I'll have to share the percentage increase with our administrative staff to see if it will be consistent with what we'll be proposing for our own employees. Obviously, if there's a difference, we'll be interested in sort of discussing that with you. Second thing is, if you're going to grow the budget, I think it's not just enough to say we need an additional employee to do what we're doing now. To me, we need what's the value add in terms of services, projects, ability to get more grants, et cetera, if we decide to go this way. And again, I want to share this with our administrative people to get some kind of a reaction. I mean, I'd love to support the option A, but I'm really, frankly, not in a position to do that tonight. But if we're going to go with option A, I need to be able to explain to people in the kind of environment which we're in now, which, by the way, is likely to continue for at least a half a year, if not 3/4 of the year, if not all of 2021, based upon the speed with which vaccinations are occurring now, maybe even 2022. I need to make sure that if we're proposing an increase, we can justify it in terms of what more the public is getting as a result of that. And then, as I said, in the percentage increase, I'd need to check to see what our proposal is going to be for employees. And finally, I would want to know, what is the total surplus for this organization? What is our cushion? Let's say that we get a third wave of the pandemic or whatever, assuming we don't have the recovery that people are thinking about now, how much of a cushion do we have?
Well, once our budget's fixed, I mean, we know what our revenue sources are going to be for the year. We're not like obviously like a government where we have to depend on tax revenues. So once it's fixed, we're good for the year. The actual surplus that we keep is minimal. It's only about 3% of our budget. So we're talking about 80 to 90,000. That's a very small amount. And the reason we can go so low, of course, is because once our budget is approved, our revenue source is fixed and our total revenue is fixed. I hope that makes sense.
It does, but now that I've opened up the issue, it does raise some interesting questions. I mean, isn't the typical thing for local governments, and I know you don't have the same thing, but for a typical situation with local governments, it's a minimum of 17%, right? And maybe it's higher now. So that's helpful to know that we really don't have, and your argument is we don't need the kind of financial cushion that the rest of us in local government have to have. Okay.
Yes.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Madam
Dave.
Chair,
Yeah, please.
first let me thank the staff for not just coming forward with one option, but multiple options for us to look at. I kind of find myself in the same place that Mr. Snyder's in, just because I don't know yet, what's happening with our own jurisdiction. I know is in the past, other than creating new positions, which I don't have a problem with, I think it can be easily justified, especially a financial position. But outside of the creation of new positions, when it comes to pay increases, we generally, at least I generally, try to make sure we're on the same reservation with what we're able to do as a jurisdiction. And I think it's a little bit too early to tell on that front. And so I guess my question is, and you might have mentioned this at the beginning and I missed it, but remind me of the timeline of when we actually have to act, when we have to, discuss the budget. I know it's not, we don't just present at one meeting and approve it, but if somebody could remind me of the timeline, I'm just trying to think through so many different organizations on different schedules, when we typically would adopt this and how that compares to when we're going to get a clearer picture of what's happening in our own localities.
Sure. So this year, the commission allowed us to actually delay. So it's March is the targeted approval. Our plan is to take the input we hear from you, and then at February's present the document with the justifications and all that for discussion, and then approval in March.
Okay. And I think that's good. I mean, certainly we're going to know more then. I know at least for us, we're going to get a pretty good picture of what's happening financially, later this month. I would say, and I think Dave kind of hinted to this, and I do think it's something important to think through, since we are reliant on the state and reliant on our local governments, at least from a local government standpoint. I'm going to say something every local elected official on here knows, which is the magnitude of the economic hit from the pandemic is likely to really affect us in the next budget cycle, not even in the one that we're getting ready to adopt. And so I do think we need to be thinking about things in multiple year segments here. And, if we do move forward with either one of these options, I think we need to think about and plan ahead for what the consequences of that or benefits of that might be as we look to the following year's budget, which I think frankly, is going to have more uncertainty because that's going to have a reflection of a whole 12-month period of time of pandemic impact and then the relative real estate hit that occurs as a result of that, which we always know is cyclically behind when we have to adopt budgets. And so I do think that's just something we need to be mindful of and, try the best we can in uncertain, unpredictable times to think through things and maybe a 2-year phase. If we do option A, what pressure does that put on us next year? If we do option B, what pressure or opportunities does that put on us the following year? Just a thought. But I like the fact that we have multiple options here. I like that we're seeing this now. Frankly, I could live with either one of them, but I'd like to withhold, supporting one over the other until I get a better picture of what's happening, at least in our own locality, with regard to the salary increases. I have no problem with recruiting and filling the open financial position.
Thank you, Mr. McKay. Madam Chair, if I could just add, one of the things we are anxious, constantly anxious, because this really, what we're talking about is state aid, is what's happening with the DRPT budget. And that's another moving. We're going towards a conservative projection for 22, saying it's the same as 21. And so we were hoping to have more than when we came in the fall for that. So we are indeed hoping that this continues to be a conservative approach, that especially gas taxes and vehicle registration will continue to increase in the coming fiscal year. And so again, as we move to February, move to March, sounds like we're going to have a lot of things coming together that will help make this a more informed process.
Okay. Thank you, Kate.
And Madam Chair.
Please, Mr. Yeah.
So I think I find myself in the same boat as Mr. McKay and Mr. Snyder. But I like to echo again, I do like having the options. So just need a little bit more time to digest some of it.
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah.
Hey, Katie, the only thing I'll just go back to, I mean, I support the notion that the salary should be in range with what our jurisdictions are doing. We are always the first one to adopt a budget because of a quirk in our scheduling. So I have more information than most would have at this stage. And I know that we're going to have our 3% in our administrator's proposal, but I know others don't know that yet. So whatever that ends up being, I think that should, that's roughly for everybody. That's kind of what we should do. So, that makes sense.
That's great. And Kate and Scott, I think you're hearing consensus on that. So I hope that's helpful, and we will be presenting to the commission next month, not adopting, right? So I think that's sort of our point, is a little more information, not from you all, but from what's happening back at home for each of us is sort of the key piece of outstanding knowledge right now.
And I can assure you that
real quick, Katie, if I could, real quick, I think Jeff made some very good points, and I know it's something the WMATA board is looking at right now too, and this, having a full year impact and understanding where we're going, the picture, I think, is something that is very much as well. So I think Jeff really did raise some very good points as it relates to the budget.
Thank you. Thanks. All right. Well, maybe not a conclusive direction, but some sense of where we're headed next in any event. So thank you, Scott, again.
Well, as I said, we absolutely appreciate it. And, all the feedback I'm hearing, we've got lots of great stuff. Scott is reaching out to all the localities, as well as the DRPT. This is going to continue to be a little bit of an iterative process. But as I mentioned, we will be presenting this at the February commission meeting. And a part of that meeting is something that we actually have in long-standing resolution within NVTC, is actually having an opportunity for public comment on our work plan, which links to our budget. And so we'll be able to have a good conversation at that. And again, for final approval at March commission meeting. The implementation, of course, of this is July 1. So again, I really appreciate the comments. I know we're kind of building the airplane while we're flying it a little bit. So we'll continue to hopefully align very closely with their jurisdictions, because that means a lot to us, of course.
Great. All right. Thank you. Okay. So I think beyond that, the only thing we also wanted to do in exec was just a quick preview for any commission activities that are upcoming, certainly virtually upcoming. And I see now we have some accompanying slides of a little bit of that agenda, Kate. And I don't know if there's anything here you wanted to be sure to speak to.
Yeah, I just, indeed, we do anticipate we're going to be doing the meetings just like this for the foreseeable future. We do have staff, including me, who are starting to rotate back into the office, just sort of for situational awareness. The real focus, I think our eyes are a lot on the WMATA budget, obviously the General Assembly, as well as what happens in Congress. So those things, I think we're going to expect to have a lot of conversation in the coming months. We do have some routine things like our state applications to DRPT and other things that are coming up in February. In March, we actually have reached out, because the routine time for General Manager Paul Wiedefeld to join us is March. So that invitation is out there. We have not had confirmation yet, but the invitation is out there for him to join us. And again, just as a reminder, because of all the budget things that are going on in your own jurisdictions, we do not plan on having an April meeting, but obviously any of the committees, we will do a meeting when necessary. And then dive June, we're going to have some decisions on 395 and 66, as well as we're hoping to launch another analytical process related to our Route 7 bus rapid transit program.
Excellent. Okay, so some good things ahead, and especially for BRT, a little bit of a interesting and innovative transit still happening despite the strange moment in which we find ourselves. Okay, so that concludes our executive committee, unless anybody has anything else for the good of the order. I see that Rhonda sent out a note to everybody urging them to dial in at 6:45. So just, I think we all just lived through some of those technical challenges. So I would encourage us to set the example and make sure we can dial in time to be connected with no hiccups. So colleagues, unless there's anything else, I will look forward to seeing everyone in about half an hour, 6:45. So thanks again.
Thank you.
Bye.